All right. So it looks like it is go time for us. People are still filtering in, but I want to do checks. So Mike's headset's on. Everybody checking in. You can hear me. So everybody that can hear me, hand up. If you can hear me really good, second hand up. Wave in the air like you just don't care. All right. Audio check good. Audience alive check good. Thank you all very much for being here. I'm sure people will be filtering in as we go, but I am going to get us rolling. A lot of great content to cover today. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited as we get rolling through the AWS Summit San Francisco. It's great to have you back here in person again. So I am John Steele. I am actually a part of the Well-Architected team. I lead the North American Solutions Architecture team for Well-Architected. So I have been with Well-Architected for several years. I've been with AWS now for 7.5 years. And in the course of that time, I've had the opportunity to engage with a lot of customers. So I've been a technical account manager and an SA, and now leading an SA team. And I also have the opportunity to work with Well-Architected. In fact, I helped to co-author the operational excellence pillar, and I've been watching the development of the sustainability pillar for a while now. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to you all about this. So as we go throughout today, after the session, we do have a short time on it. So when the session is done, if you have questions about Well-Architected or sustainability or anything related to how you can use Well-Architected for sustainability or your architecture for sustainability, happy to meet with you afterwards. So please feel free to come and talk to me later. So let's first quickly talk about what is available to help you when it comes to just architecture best practices in general. So at AWS, we have a lot of resources designed to help you know what the best practices are and to understand how to actually implement those best practices. So it includes Well-Architected, which is a comprehensive set of best practices across 6 pillars, sustainability being the newest. We just launched that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. We're going to really dive into sustainability, but it really is there to help you with sustainable architecture. So AWS Sustainability actually has a bunch more resources to talk about how AWS and Amazon approach sustainability and other tools and resources that are available. There's also the AWS Solutions Library and Builders Libraries, which I'll mention a bit in a second here. And those are all referenceable through the AWS Architecture Center, which gives you a set of robust reference architectures, diagrams, best practices, and a lot more. So those are all some things that can really help you when it comes to how you architect on AWS, including how you architect for sustainability. So a couple things I do want to call out. As I mentioned, I am on the Well-Architected team. So Well-Architected is designed to help you learn the AWS best practices, measure your workloads and your teams against those best practices, and then find opportunities for improvement. So as you're doing that with Well-Architected, a lot of times once you've figured out where the opportunities are, the next question is, okay, now I know what I should do. How do I do that? Well, that's really where we have the AWS Solutions Library. So there's a good coupling between these two resources. So if you're trying to figure out, well, how do I do this thing that I now know I need to work on or need to improve? The Solutions Library is a great starting point to get reference architectures, sample solutions, even things that come with CloudFormation templates you can kind of are pre-built, you can put in your account, as well as opportunities to engage with our partners and get partners to support you with solutions. So what are we actually going to talk about? There's the introduction to my background, some resources to help you as we go through today, but really this is what we're here for. So first, I want to talk about why we're here in terms of sustainability. What do you need to know about sustainability? How does it work in AWS? And how can AWS help partner with you on your sustainability journey? Then we're also going to talk about how Well-Architected can help you when it comes to sustainability. Then after that, we're going to give you some good tactical advice as a builder. What are some things you can do to start working on your sustainability goals now? So first thing we need to do is talk about why we're here. And this is it. So we know that the sustainability trends are increasing. So we know that sustainability has gone from being kind of a buzzword to a thing that's actually becoming a part of how many businesses really are putting at the core of their operations. Now, the first reason for that is obviously customer demand. So we know that customers are more and more likely to invest in companies and to want to do business with companies based on their sustainability stance. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. If customers are looking for sustainability, you need to figure out how you're going to provide them information about how you're doing business sustainably. Now, there's also beyond that, of course, in many areas, we see that there's an increasing amount of government regulation. So we do see a lot of things from government regulation that we have to have companies that are able to show how they're reducing their environmental impacts and how they're growing their sustainability within their business. Now, other than this important is, I'm sure many of you have probably seen this as well. If you're working at a company, I'm assuming here, because sustainability is at least of interest to you, So we're also seeing a trend that people want to work for companies and they want to see their companies actually do work to demonstrate how they're going to reduce environmental impact, how they're going to have a more sustainable approach to doing business. So the other thing that's happening is this: environmental impact investing and sustainability impact investing is becoming much more common. So when it comes to growing businesses and growing what the resources are that are available to build out your business, there's a lot of focus now from many investment firms that want to see how you're going to look at your environmental impact and how you're going to try and improve the sustainability of the business that you have. So what that really comes down to is, bottom line here, sustainability is rapidly becoming a competitive advantage. So focusing on being a sustainable business, on being able to demonstrate how you reduce your environmental impact, that is something that can make your business competitive against the rest of the market, something that many companies are starting to move towards. So that's really why we're here. Now, to drive that point home, we actually have a study from Accenture, and in that study, they see that for businesses where sustainability is a core to how they're doing business and part of their focus, it's actually driving better business growth. So basically, what Accenture is saying is the strongest performing businesses are likely to be twin transformers. So companies that find new value at the intersection of digital technology and sustainability. So powered by these twin engines of growth, Accenture is actually looking at those companies outperforming their peers by 2.5 times. It's a big deal. So that's really why sustainability matters and why we're here, why we're starting to talk about it, and why we're giving you some practical advice for how to think about implementing it. So now that we know why we're here and why it matters, probably the next question is, yeah, but how do I get past the challenges I'm having when it comes to sustainability? So let's talk about some of these challenges. I'm just going to ask if any of you are facing these. So does anyone here have any idea how to actually identify where their big carbon emissions are coming from? Anyone? It's a challenge, right? I don't see any hands up. I know bright lights in my face, but assuming no one really has a good idea for that right now. So there's a challenge. How do I know where my carbon emissions in my business are actually coming from? Next thing is, how do I actually find methods to reduce the energy and the water, the environmental impacts that I'm having? That's another challenge. Anyone here have that as a challenge or see that as a challenge in the way that they figure out sustainability? Okay, it's another problem. So next thing is, okay, cool. I know that sustainability matters. I know my business needs to focus on it. I need to find ways to identify what my impact is. I need to find ways to reduce, but I don't understand how to actually innovate when it comes to transforming my business and getting a more sustainable business. So how do I go about doing that? And then the last thing is this. You know, in modern business, the reason the whole term business to business exists is that no business exists by itself, right? You're in a company where your business and the things you do, you're almost guaranteed to be dependent on other businesses, a part of the overall value chain that you deliver. How do you ensure that you're partnering with businesses that are able to help you when it comes to your sustainability goals? So those are some of those transformation challenges that we've seen customers coming to us with. So that's what we're here to try and talk about and help you through. So before we go into how to do that, it is important you're all here because I'm assuming that you're on AWS or you're evaluating AWS. So quick check of who's here now. How many of you are running a production workload in AWS currently? Looks like about 75, 80%. How many of you are evaluating or running test workloads, looking at what it looks like to migrate to AWS right now? The other 25% of you, okay. So you're looking at AWS. How many of you are in this session because sustainability on AWS is one of the challenges you're trying to figure out how to handle? Most hands going up. Okay, good. All right. So what I want to talk about then is where are Amazon and AWS? If you're partnering with us, you're going to be running your workloads on AWS. What is AWS doing right now to be a part of helping to reduce environmental impact as a company, as part of Amazon, and to be sustainable? So first thing we got to talk about is the Climate Pledge. How many of you are familiar with Climate Pledge, right? So Climate Pledge is something that was started by Amazon, but as Amazon recognizes, as I said, no company exists by themselves and no company can really handle the climate change challenge on their own. It requires partnership, working together with a lot of companies. So the Climate Pledge Agreement was created because the Climate Pledge is designed for companies to sign on along with Amazon to try and hit the Paris Accord Agreement for sustainability and environmental impact targets. We want to hit that 10 years ahead of time. Right now, the Paris Agreement is based upon a 2050 date. The climate pledge is a group of companies working together to try and hit those targets by 2040, 10 full years ahead of what the Paris Agreement is set around. So the climate pledge was announced September 2019. At this point in time, there are over 200 companies that have signed on along with this, not just Amazon, other large companies like Verizon. So we're not doing this alone, okay? This is an important thing, but AWS is obviously part of that. Now, the net zero carbon goal is 2040, but we are on a path to hit renewable energy of 100% across all of Amazon's utilization. So all of our energy utilization is on target. Originally, the goal for the climate pledge was 2030. We're actually 5 years ahead of schedule. So within the next 3 years, we're on path to be able to hit 100% renewable energy by 2025. That's where Amazon's at right now. And on top of that, in that climate pledge fund, there is a $2 billion pledge that was made by Amazon to try and make it so that there's areas that are going to be really tough challenges to solve. Amazon can help find ways to invest in solving those hard carbon reduction challenges. So that's the climate pledge. Now, going beyond that, great, that's Amazon. Obviously, Amazon Web Services, AWS is a part of Amazon. But where does AWS fit in this, and how are we approaching this? So first thing is AWS starts with water stewardship. So we're using a lot of improvements and innovations, because just like Amazon has, AWS has constantly innovated for our customers. We're always trying to innovate in other ways too, including our environmental impact and sustainability. So water stewardship, using improved cooling like evaporative cooling, using recycled and non-potable water so that we can try and reduce the water impact that we have. Also, big advancements in efficiency. So you've seen we have the Graviton processors. We went from Graviton 2, we just announced Graviton 3 processors. Those processors are brand new engineering architecture to continuously reduce the necessary energy consumption to get better performance at the same time. So it's not just direct environmental impact, it's also being more efficient at scale. So also new data center construction. As we're building new data centers, we're also incorporating the newest technologies and advancements in the way that the data centers are constructed, including concrete that's designed to have reduced carbon emissions and do carbon absorption. So those are some other things that go outside of just the technical advancements. As well, there's multiple renewable energy renewable energy processes out there that we're using to try and get us, again, on target so that by 2025, 100% of AWS's data centers are going to be powered by entirely renewable energy. Now, something else that we're doing beyond that is, it's great, that's what AWS is doing, but we want to do things to obviously help our customers so they can better understand, well, how do I fit in that story? What is my impact? So a couple things that we've released. First off, the AWS sustainability pillar for Well-Architected was announced at reInvent the end of last year. And we also announced earlier this year the carbon footprint calculator. So it allows you as a customer to actually see what your carbon footprint is of the resources you're using on AWS. We're going to dive into that in a second as well. And then also the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative provides free access to satellite data and climate models so that if you want to do work to understand how you can directly impact with your business, there's a ton of resources for you to do your own work and understand what the future climate models look like and how you're impacting them. So that's some of our highlights overall. How does that actually work out for you as a customer? Well, we have a really big carbon reduction opportunity when workloads are migrated to the cloud. So 451 Research, external research agency, went through and did an evaluation of all of the enterprise data centers they could get information on and compared it to AWS data centers and the AWS utilization. And if you are in the US, by moving from your own hosted enterprise data centers to AWS, you can actually have a 3.6 times increase in energy efficiency. And in fact, for Europe and Asia Pacific, it's almost a 5 times energy efficiency increase. So all of those things we talked about that AWS is doing can make it so customers can see significant efficiencies. And then as you also see, the hope would be actually to get beyond that to up to 96% by the time that AWS is running on 100% renewables. So a lot of advancements that can help when it comes to the actual carbon reduction offered by migrating to AWS. So what does that really mean in the US? So if we look at that carbon reduction opportunity, because we're here in the US, so let's dive into that for a moment. So in AWS, it's 3.6 times more energy efficient than the median US enterprise data centers that were surveyed by 451 Research. So that means it's a 61% that is based upon a higher efficiency. So as we talked about, AWS runs highly efficient data centers. That includes part of the benefit of the cloud, where we ensure optimal utilization of resources, but also investments in better resources like Graviton processors and the inference processors that have much higher energy efficiency for the amount of power they can put out. We also have 11% of that carbon reduction that's attributable to a more efficient data center facility itself. So it's not just the AWS resources, the data centers, the power, it's the cooling, and how that's all managed is also more efficient in our data centers. And 17% of that is attributable to reduced energy and electricity consumption because we're moving to renewables. So that's kind of where the breakdown comes from in that study. And if you want to get more information, you can see that 451 Research that gives you more information about that and how they came up with that independently. So probably many of you have seen this before. So let me start with this. Familiar with the shared responsibility model? Okay, if you haven't seen this before, let's talk about it. So I have a thought on shared responsibility. I hear this often, and I've been with customers before that say, oh, okay, so this is where AWS draws the line and says, well, you got to do this part, we do this part. It's not it at all. It's not how shared responsibility works. Shared responsibility is AWS's mentality that when you did this all yourself, you had 100% responsibility for all of that. That full stack, everything you had to figure out, from your data centers, from your operations, from your teams, from the software development, everything there was your responsibility. By moving to AWS, we are taking on a share of that responsibility for you. So now that shared responsibility for security, we do security of the cloud, and it gives you the opportunity then using our resources and tools to do security in the cloud for the part that you still have responsibility for. Now I want to extend that shared responsibility model. It's not just for security. Coming from Well-Architected, if you actually look at the way Well-Architected works, that shared responsibility model means that we take on a share of how you get reliability. There's reliability of the cloud and opportunities for you to have reliability in the cloud. Performance efficiency of the cloud, performance efficiency in the cloud. The ability to do cost optimization of the cloud, as well as your ability to do cost optimization in the cloud. And if we think through all of those pillars, we also have now the sustainability pillar, so that model still applies. When it comes to the shared responsibility model, AWS has taken on a portion of that responsibility for you. So now servers, cooling, water, waste, the data centers, electricity supply, the building materials, renewables, all of that is the sustainability of the cloud. But also what we're going to dive into today is there's more to it. There's things you can do to be more sustainable in the cloud as well. So that's what we're going to dive into now. So take just a moment here. I put up some challenges before, so I want you to think about this. We don't have to do a hand raise here, but just put these in the back of your mind. What is it when it comes to sustainability? You're here because you want to learn more about it. What is it that you are trying to solve when it comes to sustainability? So what are the biggest challenges related to sustainability you have now? We talked about them before. Is it insights? Is it knowledge for how to improve? Is it how do I figure out what my targets are? If you have an understanding of your challenges, say you've gotten past that and you've taken the time to lay out, I know these are the challenges I'm facing. How are you actually currently working to solve those challenges? What is working for you when it comes to that? And is there anything that would make it easier when it comes to the sustainability or reducing your environmental impact? Do you have anything in place now that could be better overcome if you were to get partnership? And then in the end, when it comes down to it, what do you wish you were capable of doing? So if you think about it in the long term, what is your end state target? What do you actually want to be able to accomplish? So I'll leave that there for a sec. Saw a couple of you took pictures. That's great. I do believe this is being recorded and all these will be available online as well. But again, keep those in the back of your head as we start progressing through some of the things that AWS offers to help you when it comes to improving your sustainability and to setting up targets and trying to achieve them. All right, so what comes next? Well, so far, we've done a pretty good job, I hope, of convincing you that moving to AWS is a good way just off the ground to try and improve the overall sustainability of the workloads that you're running. Migrating to AWS, we've seen with lots of data, can offer you opportunities to improve your sustainability, to reduce your environmental impact. So migrating to take advantage of the efficiency of the cloud, that is a great next step. Beginning there, and that's a good way to start. Now I asked how many of you are running production workloads, so cool. You're in AWS, but now what if I'm there? Well, the next step is to optimize. So now do things like using the well-architected framework sustainability pillar to get a better understanding of how to do more optimized or sustainable workloads in AWS, and working through the resources we have to start coming up with sustainability targets as you optimize. So then the last step is, once you have an understanding of how to optimize what you have, how can you rethink it? How can you go on a digital innovation journey that allows you to take the innovation tools at AWS and rethink and refactor the way that your workloads are structured, or work with AWS, work with professional services, work with our partners, and find opportunities where you can actually really transform how your workloads are structured now. Because I'm going to ask a real quick question. How many of you would say, don't worry, no one look around anybody else, just look straight at me, be honest. How many of you would say that your initial journey to AWS was a lift and shift journey? Come on, be honest. Okay, a lot of hands. Don't look around, just look at me. Don't look at each other. All right. So we know that that's a common pattern. Keep in mind, even with that pattern of lift and shift, there's still an opportunity for improvement just by being on AWS. So it's a good start when it comes to sustainability. Now, how many of you did lift and shift and you realized, yeah, now I really got to re-architect that thing and make it more cloud native? How many of you are in the middle of that journey now? Okay. So what I would highly encourage you is to think about, how do I include coming up with sustainability targets as a part of the way that I rethink or re-architect my workloads and make them cloud native? Where does sustainability fit in that journey? So we're going to dive in now and talk about, okay, great. We know migrating to the cloud is good. I'm convinced, fine. What about the actual opportunities for me to be sustainable in the cloud? How do I actually optimize those workloads? That's what we're going to dive into here. So optimizing our cloud workloads. How do we actually do this on AWS? So first thing is, we talked about well-architected, so I might as well just jump into well-architected. We think of well-architected, those pillars, as being the foundation for building solid workloads. If you want a workload that it is designed well and operates well, that's what well-architected is about. So we have 5 pillars initially. In fact, it used to be 4 pillars. So operational excellence was added in 2016. So we have, how do you design now for operations, design for security, design for reliability, design for performance efficiency, and design for cost optimization. That's what we have right now for well-architected. It's best practices and design principles that help you learn how to design in AWS around those things. Again, this is where you learn, hey, in shared responsibility, what has AWS taken on for me, but what is it I can still do in these areas? Now, we recognize that beyond those business needs, we need to optimize our architectures for something else that's coming. So pardon the cheesy animations, but let's go with it, right? So we see that things are happening. There's constant changes in climate. We see that things are becoming more common, like really wild storms and a lot of things that are indicative of a change in our climate, including oceans rising. So there is a climate crisis that we know is happening. So what is AWS doing about that, and what can you do about it to try and help? Well, that's where the sustainability pillar for well-architected comes in. So it is designed to help you understand what are the best practices for doing sustainability in the cloud. And if you have an idea of what the best practices are, how can you measure your workloads against those and set targets for improvement over time? Pretty much the same as all of the rest of the pillars in well-architected, same mentality. How can you learn best practices, measure your workloads and teams against them, and find opportunities for improvement, and then get guidance on, well, okay, I know what my improvement should be. How do I actually do it? So, key thing about the sustainability pillar, sustainability was launched as a framework white paper back in 2021 at reInvent last year, and it was fed up as a white paper. At the beginning of this month, it officially launched in the AWS Well-Architected tool, which means now you have the opportunity to add sustainability best practices to the reviews that you do of your workloads. And it also means you can go back to existing workloads you've already done well-architected framework reviews on, and you can add sustainability into that review process. You can upgrade your workloads, add the pillar in, and get insights into where you're at from a sustainability perspective. It is generally available today. So out of curiosity, how many of you have used the well-architected tool to do a well-architected framework review? Couple hands. Okay, if you haven't, here's my sales pitch for you. Guess what? Guess how much well-architected costs? Nothing, no additional charge, right? You can run as many well-architected framework reviews as you want. So you can create as many workloads in the tool as you want. You can share them between accounts. And more importantly, if you need support running those well-architected framework reviews, you can reach out to your AWS account team and they can assist you with that. So talk to your account manager, talk to your solutions architect, or find someone in your org that knows how to get a hold of them. This is now generally available. So I highly encourage you, if you have production workloads, consider doing a well-architected framework review against those workloads and include the sustainability pillar to get an idea of what are the improvement opportunities and the best practices. So using the sustainability pillar, you can understand your environmental impacts for the services that you're using. You can be able to quantify what the impacts are throughout the entire workload lifecycle, so you can learn what it's going to mean over time, and it will allow you to apply best practices and find areas for improvement so that you can reduce the environmental impact and create a more sustainable workload as a part of your organization. Now, there's something else that we released too. The common question is, okay, great. Now I know the best practices, but how do I actually measure? I need a way to measure my workloads themselves, understand what is the impact they're causing. So again, earlier this year, we released the customer carbon footprint tool. It allows you to track, measure, and review, as well as forecasting the carbon emissions generated from your AWS usage. The great thing about this, when I say forecast, it means it will forecast as AWS is continually working to reduce or get to 100% renewable by 2025. You can see what that impact will be on your utilization as well in terms of the carbon footprint. So anyone actually had an opportunity to see the carbon footprint tool in the console yet? Okay, a couple of hands, good. So if you haven't seen this, this is actually built into the cost and usage report. So if you go to the billing console, go into cost of usage, you will see the carbon footprint tool at the bottom. The common question that's also asked is, okay, you say I can use this to calculate emissions. It'll allow me to see what my historical footprint looks like. It'll allow me to forecast changes as Amazon moves, but I have like 10 accounts or 20 accounts or 200 accounts or 2,000 accounts or 20,000 accounts. How does this work with that? So the way it works, because it's attached to the billing console, it means that if you have consolidated billing enabled, for example, if you're using organizations or you use Control Tower to set up in an organization's environment, whatever you set up as your management account, wherever the consolidated bills roll up to, you will have insight across all of the accounts that are connected to that main account. So if you want to get an idea of what your carbon footprint looks like, this tool is now generally available. You can see it in the console, all right? So we have a good idea now of, all right, I know that I have a bunch of things that I can do for monitoring and understanding my carbon footprint and my overall impact when it comes to environment and sustainability. I've got an opportunity to figure out what my goals are. I've taken some time to do it, but how do I actually improve? So first thing is, again, figure out where you are and where you want to go. You need to identify, what does improvement look like? How much reduction do I want to see? What am I looking for in terms of the timeline for that? Identify what your targets are, both from what the levels you want to get to and the timelines you want to do them. After you've done that, the next thing to do is actually to evaluate the specific improvements and prioritize and plan those improvements. Figure out which one's the most important to do. So next thing is then to test those improvements, test them, see if they do what you think they're going to do. Deploy those changes once you've tested and they are working to your production environment. Then measure those results, and of course, feed that back into rebuilding your targets. By the way, this isn't rocket science, right? This is probably the way you should do all improvement plans. Same set of rules works, but now with sustainability pillar, you have the opportunity, and the carbon footprint tool, you have the opportunity to actually be able to measure against those targets as you establish them. So here's something that's really important to think about. This is a quick pitfall that I want to jump into. It is really common if we think about, hey, I'm just going to measure resources. Just measuring resources is great. The problem is only measuring resources without actually measuring what work those resources are doing. You kind of fall into a trap. Hey, my resources are a level line, or they've even dropped. That's great, except for the actual utilization, percentage of utilization and output from those resources is dropping more rapidly than the resource utilization. Might be a cause for alarm. So as you're thinking about how to actually build targets, be sure your targets are structured around how much resources required for each unit of work, and make that your key performance indicator. Make sure you're measuring, am I getting more or less out of the resources that I'm using, so you can compare over time. Don't fall into just looking at resources alone. So does that make sense to everyone? Why that's important, okay? We see this, and the reason we call this out specifically is I've worked a lot of customers where things look great initially because they do just start at resources, but the KPI isn't resource utilization, it's resource utilization over the unit of work that you're trying to measure against. So what I want to do now is dive into the actual best practices areas in the sustainability pillar. If you're not familiar with Well-Architected, if you go to the Well-Architected website on AWS, you can actually find a map that shows all 6 pillars. Within each pillar, you have a set of best practice areas or groupings of general best practice guidance. So these are the 5 major groupings of best practices or the best practice areas. We're going to dive into each one of these a little bit and give you some really practical examples of how you can actually make improvements on AWS around these examples. So the things in the sustainability pillar, we have best practices around how to understand the impact of user behavior on your sustainability and your environmental impact, how to use software and architecture patterns to improve your sustainability and reduce your environmental impact, how to make hardware selections that help to reduce your environmental impact and improve your sustainability or meet your sustainability targets, how to do data structures. This is actually one that it's surprising. A lot of customers that I've engaged with sustainability, this is something they don't think about. The way your data is structured has an impact on sustainability. We're gonna dive into that. And then looking at your development and your deployment processes and how to optimize those to be as sustainable as you want, all right? So first, let's start with our user behavior patterns. What are some of the best practices inside of user behavior patterns? So first, this is just kind of the general thing, and you're probably familiar with this. We'll talk a little bit more about how to do these. Scale your infrastructure with user load. Remember I said thinking about utilization over unit of work? Well, a good way to make sure that you're doing utilization versus unit of work is to ensure that your user load is scaling up and scaling down your infrastructure as well. Only put out as much as you need when it comes to resources. Auto scaling, right? Simple answer. There's more to it than that, obviously, but if you're not using auto scaling, probably a good starting point. This is another we're going to dive into. Align your service level agreements or objectives and targets. Again, depends on your org, how you structure this. But think about your sustainability goals and your SLAs. If you have non-business critical systems, maybe it's okay to tell a user it's going to take 10 minutes instead of 2 seconds to do a thing if it's not business critical. Think about that and think about the impact that can have on your sustainability targets. Next thing is eliminate the creation and maintenance of unused assets. Now this sounds like kind of a, oh yeah, okay, if I'm not using it, I should turn it off. That's exactly what it is, but it means have a process to find that and ensure you're removing them. This is also one of those great places where there's an intersectionality between sustainability goals and cost optimization goals. So when we think about well-architected in the 6 pillars, sometimes there's trade-offs. Maybe in order to hit my sustainability goals, I'm going to actually have to reduce performance, or I'm going to have to reduce the overall availability of a system and say, 3 nines is enough. I don't need 5 nines. But sometimes there's also intersectionality and not trade-offs, like cost, for example, which we'll dive into. And then optimize the geographic placement of your workloads for your user locations. Now, this is a couple of components. One, cost and the amount of energy utilization and efficiency is different in different regions within the US and within globally for AWS. But also, more importantly, think about how do you make it so that users are able to get faster response times and do that at a lower cost. A lot of times that means using things that distribute that workload a lot closer to the user. So whether it's putting it in regions or using CDNs, that's a really good way to look at how to get the work closer to your users. So I'm going to dive into this one real quick because a lot of times people ask about this. So what does this mean? Now, keep in mind, impact-friendly SLAs. It means you need to evaluate what do you really need. Now, there's certain ways to think about this at a really broad level. So for example, a lot of customers are doing, going from multi-AZ to multi-region even. They want to be multi-region. Well, if you think about multi-region and certain workloads, do you need to have warm resources in another region? Or is it okay if, hey, as far as availability, if that thing's down, it's not actually costing me money. Maybe there's a little bit of, customer wait time that's involved in it, but is it worth it for the sustainability that I'm trying to get? So there's big picture things to think about, but also going even smaller than that, thinking about the types of resources and individual resource components and whether or not they're always live, always on, or things that can be spun up on demand if it means the wait time goes from a millisecond or a nanosecond to a couple of seconds or even a minute. Is that okay? Maybe it is. It might mean an increase in the response time, but overall, that reduction in impact may not actually be something that matters to users if they understand why it's happening. And in fact, often as you start evaluating these, you might find users aren't even aware of that impact. The difference between an email that gets sent in 3 seconds and 30 seconds is probably not that big to the average user, right? So something else to think about, your software patterns. So as we move into this best practice area, software patterns are really important. There's a lot that goes into having an optimized software pattern so that the software architecture is designed for things like asynchronous or scheduled jobs. That's really important because, again, always on, constantly live, warm or hot resources not only cost more, they also utilize more resources, and because they're running all the time, they can reduce reduce the sustainability targets that you're trying to hit. So think about parts of your architecture that you might be able to do asynchronous responses or schedule things to happen or even batch them where it makes sense. Also, remove or refactor workload components that are low or no use. Again, it's one of those great places where now we have this sort of intersection between, hey, if I get rid of things I'm not using, it's going to cost me less. Oh yeah, and it's also more sustainable. So there's multiple benefits to your business of doing that. And then also think about optimizing your code so that it consumes the most time or resources and stops as much as possible. So there's a lot of patterns for this. We'll talk about, serverless or event-driven architecture is a good way to do that. But think about places you can make it where you don't need a resource up and running all the time because you're not actually using it all the time. How can you optimize your code to allow you to do that? So some categories to think about when it comes to optimizing. First, do less work and store less stuff. Again, benefits because it can help you when it comes to the cost. But overall, when it comes to optimization, find areas in your architectures where you can make it so that the work that is being done can be spread out also more efficiently. So think about, can that work be more efficient? Is there times that I could schedule it where it would work better? Are there ways that I can use interstitial resources that are not running at 100% utilization and put my work into the places where I'm not fully utilizing my resources? So you want to drive the utilization as high as possible. Then also think about sustainable scheduling strategies. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but scheduling is a great way to disperse your workload. And we'll show you an example of what that looks like and why considering that can really help to drive down overall resource utilization and your environmental and sustainability impact. And then think about steering your work to more sustainable regions. So if you know there are regions where you have a lot higher sustainability and AWS gives you information on that, consider putting your work in those regions or moving your work to regions where it's closest to your users so the utilization and the amount of performance required to hit what your user goals are is a lot lower. Now, some things to consider in terms of how to optimize there. Obviously, compute. As we said, simple answer. You want to reduce your idle resources and maximize utilization? If you're using EC2, auto scaling. Simple answer. If I'm not using a resource, turn it off. When I need more resources, bring it up. So if you're not using auto scaling for EC2, absolutely a really good low-hanging fruit target to go after. Now, something else that's a little more advanced than that, though, is thinking about how you can improve the overall utilization by shaping your demand against supply. So it's not just having your supply go up, but how do you actually use a supply that is matched to what your demand is? So for example, spot instances, keeping in mind with spot, yes, you need something where, again, we talked about SLAs, maybe your availability targets aren't as high, or you have a highly fault tolerant workload, or it's a scheduling based thing where resources that are ephemeral and go away are not going to impact it. That's one way to do it, but also jitter for scheduled tasks. So let me show you what I mean by jitter for scheduled tasks and how that can help. So let's think about sustainable scheduling for reducing your peaks. So here's an example of maybe what a typical workload might look like. So if you think about it, you always want to have provision capacity that's a little bit above what your expected peaks are, right? Because you never know when something's going to spike above that. And if you do that, that means if your peak has to be minimum where your highest points are, not the average, right? Look at the average. Average is pretty low. But if my peak is that high, I need whatever percent over that provision so that just in case I spike above that peak, I have the resources to handle it. Now, that means in terms of my provision capacity, that's that much resource that's sitting live, idle, and probably being wasted. Bad for cost, also bad for sustainability. What about this alternative? What if we found opportunities to drop that peak? Now, there's a couple ways in order to drop that peak. First thing we could do for dropping that peak is, let's actually consider simple things like adding queuing. What if I added a queue or some sort of buffering so that all of my workload was being funneled into something where I would only put as much load as I actually had peak capacity to handle. So it actually allowed me to reduce my provision capacity. So I'm using a lot less. Or alternatively, what if I accomplish this by using scheduling? Say I have batch jobs or things that run on a regular basis. What if I were to set it up so that the batches happen in the times that I know I'm at the lowest peak? So I'm actually utilizing resources in a consistent and understood way that's a much lower overall peak. So it's a couple of things to consider as ways you can actually be more sustainable by reducing your peak. And like I said, just in case you got the finance folks out there that want to see your cloud bill go down, it's another great way to do to reduce your utilization. So a couple of pro tips to consider when it comes to optimizing for sustainability. First, power efficiency. We already kind of said this. If you can migrate your EC2 to purpose-built architectures like Graviton, especially Graviton 2 and Graviton 3 now, they are far more efficient. And you can see a significant decrease in the amount of environmental impact for the same amount of capability output. So consider looking at things like Graviton-based instances. Something else, serverless. I'm going to be really vocally honest and say serverless really bothers me. You ready? Nobody else here can hear it, so I have a secret for you. Everybody ready for this? Here's a secret. There's still servers behind serverless. Who knew, right? So because there is still server or compute capacity required for serverless, sometimes the name kind of makes people think, well, I don't have to worry about the environmental impact. Well, yeah, there's still compute resources for serverless, right? However, if you think about serverless a little different instead, think about it as an event-driven architecture. We want, again, get to the smallest unit of necessary compute in order to deliver the unit of work, right? So the best way to reduce that resource to unit of work is get the smallest unit of compute. When I say that, by the way, think compute universally. When people hear serverless, first thing, who here, when I say serverless, first word in your head is Lambda? Quite a few. Or containers, right? Now don't forget, there's a lot of other AWS serverless resources, even typical, like you can do serverless Aurora, right? DynamoDB is serverless. Step functions is serverless. API gateway is serverless. Those are all parts of an event-driven architecture. Try and set your system up so that it only uses resources when events occur and is not using has nothing idle state sitting around, right? So one really good way to really optimize for sustainability. Also, think about things like instance scheduler. Say that you aren't using Lambda and step functions and API gateway. That's not how it's structured, and you don't have the time and energy or budget or resources to completely re-architect to a fully event-driven architecture. That's fine. There's still ways to reduce even with EC2. Think about things like instance scheduler. How many of you here have ever done, how many of your developers are actually engineers? You build the stuffs, okay? The future belongs to the developers, right? So if you're the ones doing that, now be honest, how many of you have realized that you spun up some development resources and you left them running for like a week or a month or a year, right? So simple ways to fix. If there's resources you know you don't need, implement things like the instance scheduler to stop stuff that you don't need to use. And it's really easy to implement that as a part of your development process. You know development hours for your team are from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific. Well, great. Set the instance scheduler up to automatically stop that stuff when it's not going to be used. And it's development, right? It's not like it's going to impact your production environment to shut those down. And then also look at Cost Explorer, because that Cost Explorer, and actually I'm going to add in here Trusted Advisor. So Trusted Advisor and Cost Explorer are great resources to get more insights about how to right size. So let's move on and talk hardware patterns. So, some good things to consider for hardware. Use the minimum amount of hardware required to meet your needs. Don't do massive scale. It's great sometimes to be like, yeah, I need a 16 XL. Yeah, well, you really needed a nano, but that's okay. You got the biggest machine possible because I want it. So don't use more hardware than you need. Then think about the instance types that will meet your requirements with the least impact. So what is the minimum necessary? And by the way, this is about where that testing and validation comes in. Think about how to test and validate that. Also, consider using managed AWS services. Remember I said shared responsibility? Managed service means when it comes to operations, you're offloading the operations overhead for sustainability to AWS by using our managed services. And then also optimize the use of your GPUs. If you're doing things that require GPU, think about the purpose-built GPU resources AWS has that are more sustainable and more efficient. So that includes things like looking at Gravitron and Inferentia. So it's the latest generation. They're designed by us. They're built for the cloud. The Graviton 3 EC2 is 60% less energy than comparable instances. That's really important. You want to see a great sustainability target, even if you're not going to re-architect and you're doing EC2, consider Gravitron or Inferentia, which is our most power efficient inference processor for doing any machine learning workloads. Okay, data patterns. This is the one people commonly miss. So let's hit some of those data patterns. Data classification. So if you don't have a data classification policy, if you're thinking about it from a compliance standpoint, if there is no classification policy, how much of your data is maximum compliance requirement? All of it is, right? Same thing is true though. There's benefits of data classification outside of compliance. Compliance is good, you got to think about that. But by implementing data classification, it means you can figure out how close to production is this data, how often is it used, and by classifying the data, you get a lot of benefits. That allows you then to have technology patterns that support data access and storage patterns that are mapped to what your user needs are. It allows you to remove unnecessary or redundant data, because data deduplication and moving stuff to colder storage is a really good way to reduce your environmental impact or improve sustainability targets. And think about shared file systems. Another great way to reduce, go to shared file systems like EFS, or consider using object-based S3 storage, because then one object available to multiple resources instead of having to duplicate it to every single EC2 instance or to every single EBS volume. And then also think about ways to minimize how much data you have to move around. Because again, moving data, there is compute required in that, right? You're moving data around, there is another impact on sustainability. So as I mentioned, you can pick lower impact storage classes. So hot, standard S3, active data, millisecond access. It's in 3 or more availability zones. But you can think about, if you were to classify your data, is there data that you don't need to have it as quickly accessible, or that steering in a different zone is better, or maybe reducing it and putting it down into Glacier or Glacier Deep Archive. And then obviously they're most important, find data you don't need and remove it entirely. So to really optimize storage, keep in mind, you need to analyze your data access patterns and your use storage tiers. So use efficient long-term storage for archival data. Again, that's a great way to reduce your environmental impact. Manage your objects using S3 lifecycle configurations. All familiar with those? You have the ability to even do that automatically now. So if you set up your data so you know what it looks like, S3 can automatically manage it for you. So use intelligent data movement with that intelligent tiering to move your data down the tiers and reduce your impact. Think about trade-offs between efficiency, latency, and reliability. Again, have to understand your data and your usage and access patterns. So outside of S3, you can also think about EBS volumes and snapshots. Another great place to save. So with EBS volumes and snapshots, especially looking for unattached EBS volumes and removing them, and also making it so that you modify the retention period of things like CloudWatch logs, or even optimize CloudWatch logs. It's great when we say, oh, just store all the things, right? Store everything, log everything, keep it all forever. If you figure out what you actually need, you can massively optimize the storage for CloudWatch. And then also think about changing the way you store data, especially text data. So columnar data formats like using Parquet or optimized row columnar format. Those are ways to actually really decrease the amount of storage space required, which helps to optimize your overall utilization. And as I mentioned, deduplication. If there's ways to not keep the data in multiple places, don't keep the exact same data on every single EBS volume, use shared storage. If you can move to object store, do that. Those are really great ways to reduce. Same thing with network, reduce the network traveled per request. So think about things like read local and write global. As I mentioned before, CDNs, having a content delivery network is a great way, or in fact, think about CDNs now, more and more, we have a ton of edge enabled services. So you have Lambda at edge. Now with Greengrass and IoT, you actually can do compute even off the cloud in an environment where you don't have direct access to network. Think about using things that actually move the necessary compute resources as close as possible to where the work is being done to reduce the overall impact. And reduce the size of the data. So do compression, use optimized APIs. Those are all things you can do. They'll reduce the amount of information you have to push over the network. Again, reducing your cost, which is great, but also helping to improve the overall sustainability and reduce your environmental impact. So our last best practice here is our development and deployment processes. So think about these things because they can be, again, the way that you actually push your code out, the way you build your code, the way you push it out, can also be great ways to accomplish a lot of the other things that we talked about. So adopt development and testing methods that allow rapid introduction of potential sustainability improvements. What do I mean by that? CI/CD. How many of you have a CI/CD pipeline? I won't say DevOps. Let's talk about the technology, not the amorphous word. Many of you hopefully are moving towards CI/CD. The idea of structuring your workload so that you can rapidly introduce changes, it's great for business. It means your users get features more often. It means you're able to keep your workload up to date. But using patterns like that also is great for sustainability because it means when you optimize for sustainability, it's much easier and faster to push those changes into production. So think about those types of things in your deployment process, not just as a benefit from a business perspective or from being able to release features and bugs and fixes more quickly, but also how it impacts sustainability and the ability to hit your sustainability targets. So also really think about increasing the utilization of build environments. Like I said, build, dev, test. I'm gonna ask the obvious question. How many of you have more environment than just production? I was hoping for everybody's hands. Most everyone's hands good. Okay, good. This is an operational excellence best practice, by the way. It's one from my pillar. I like it a lot, right? So you want dev and test and build, and you want those environments before production. But how do you optimize those? Do you need those to be at 5 nines of availability up and running 24/7? Well, no, obviously not, right? How can you optimize the resource utilization and everything before production? Then also think about, for any of you that are doing mobile development, how many of you are doing mobile development stuff for iOS or Android or something like that? A couple people, all right? So that's part of the reason that we have managed device farms, because those also are highly, highly efficient. Our device farms are optimized, so again, it's the lowest power, lowest resource utilization. So as developers, if you're a developer, or if you're DevOps, even operations engineers, come on, we're all kind of developers these days now. So some things to think about as developers that you individually can do to try and help when it comes to sustainability. First off, we talked a lot of sustainability stuff today. Make sure you understand the sustainability terminology. So when someone tells you a cool buzzword they heard, you know what that actually means in terms of implementation. Use the climate, carbon footprint tools so you can actually get an understanding and really estimate, hey, what is my stuff in AWS actually putting out in terms of a carbon footprint? Take the time, all these patterns we talked about. I know we went really fast through them, some really rough overview of that material, but think about those new patterns and consider, hey, there's some low-hanging fruit that I can implement in my initial environment because it's lift and shift. I should try and do those. But what does the next step look like? If I figure out my sustainability targets, are there any of these new patterns that might really help me get there faster? And I should include them as I'm evolving and doing some digital innovation in my environments. Think about trade-offs. Like I said, if you look at the well-architected framework, you look at our 6 pillars, we fully recognize that in those 6 pillars, you are being encouraged to make trade-offs. Sometimes you need to think about, do I really need 5 nines? Or maybe I don't need 5 nines. Do I really need to be as absolutely distributed as possible, or is performance more important? Do I have the ability for operations to take on some of the load for reliability? So there's trade-offs to make, but beyond those trade-offs, also think about how sometimes there's intersectionality. There's a really good overlap between improving your cost optimization and being more sustainable. So think about how those things can work together for your benefit. And in the end, try and work to implement those sustainable architectures, especially as you're re-architecting. If you have a new project or a new workload, consider running through the Well-Architected Framework review and doing the sustainability pillar against that architecture. So just a quick story. Qantas Airlines. So Qantas Airlines, they have Project Constellation. So there's a public reference. You can dig into it more. So from a business point of view, Constellation is going to save $40 million in fuel costs each year, which is a 1 to 2% improvement on their flight plans. So they're going to reduce their carbon emissions by 50 million kilos each year just by making a 1 to 2% reduction in fuel consumption, using a system they built on AWS to improve or optimize their routes, to route around storms, to route around bad weather, and to change the routes to get the optimized flow. So that's a huge reduction. Remember what I said, it's great to see that in that process, not only did they save money, they were also able to do it more, they were able to be more sustainable. So if you want to learn more about that, that's definitely, there's a study that's available. You can see more about that. So we're coming up to the end here. So next steps. Giving you a ton of information. We went fast through a whole lot of stuff. So what do you do now if you want to actually take the next step in your sustainability journey? So first thing is, look at what you have right now. Is it not in AWS and it'd be easy to get there, and moving it to AWS could reduce your impact? Great. Is it in AWS and maybe it is just a standard 3-tier using EC2, using EBS, which is fine. Those are great architectures. They work for you. Think about how you can implement low-hanging fruit changes. They're going to reduce your impact just in the resources you already have. Think about doing a well-architected framework review for sustainability. So if you haven't done well-architected, I highly encourage it again. I will be clear. It is available at no additional cost. I know time ain't free, right? So it is something that does require several hours of investment for your teams, but consider setting aside the time to do that, or even work with AWS to get help from our resources to help run through that and evaluate the sustainability of either upcoming architectures or your current architectures. Work with your account team, your solutions architect, your account manager. If you're on enterprise support, how many of you have AWS enterprise support? Anyone? Couple, good. So that means you have a TAM, you might have a customer solutions manager. Work with your account team and see what they can do to get you access to resources to come up with a sustainability plan. There are a lot more sustainability news and case studies like Qantas. So if you want to dig into them more, AWS-Amazon.com sustainability. Check that out so you can see how other customers are doing it. It's not just AWS saying, yeah, no, we promise you can do it. You can see how other customers like you are doing that as well. I'm going to leave you with this final quote. So I'm hoping everyone here knows Dr. Werner Vogels. Yes, our CTO. If you haven't met Werner, Werner is unmissable. So this is actually a quote from Werner when we were releasing the sustainability pillar and talking about the climate pledge. So battling climate change deserves the highest priority of our attention, and AWS is committed to running our business in the most environmentally friendly way possible. So this is the reason that partnering with us can help you to be more sustainable. So if this stuff is useful and interesting, if you want to learn more about anything AWS, well-architected, sustainability, check out Skill Builder. There's a ton of great courses. Some of them are even free, 500 plus free courses that are there. There's also the AWS certifications that can help you learn more. So take a look at those. But at this point, that's all I have for you. So that's me. If you want to hit me up on LinkedIn, I'll always admit, I don't go on LinkedIn often, so if it takes me a week to connect with you, I apologize, but happy to talk more about that as well as talking afterwards. And last and most important, please complete the session survey. At AWS, we haven't made this clear, 90 to 95% of what we do is driven by our customers, by you. It's what you want from us. That's why we're doing sustainability. So please complete the session survey because these sessions are the same as everything else we do. Your feedback really does matter and it changes how we do this. And by the way, I love 5-star ratings, but if you have negative feedback or missed something and wanted to see something else, we want to hear that too. So you don't just have to be nice. Tell me everything, all right? But I really appreciate the feedback. It's important to us. So thank you all very much and have a great rest of your summit.